Hey guys, welcome to lesson number 18, 9.2. Today we're going to look at law of cosines. So yesterday we looked at law of sines, talking about how to find missing sides and angles if it's not a right triangle. Today, same thing. It's going to be if it's not a right triangle. The only difference with law of cosines is now we're looking at where we had law of sines, we had to have this matching angle inside. We had to know either AA, BB, or CC. With law of cosines, we're now saying, okay, we don't know AA, BB, or CC, so here's our other option. And so you notice here with law of cosines, it's going to be if we're given two sides and the angle between them, so side, angle, side, or it's going to be if we're given all three sides. So again, this option, law of cosines, so law of sines I think is a little simpler than law of cosines, so we kind of use that first. Law of cosines is what we go to if we don't have this matching angle and matching side. Okay, and so with law of cosines, we have these three different formulas. Okay, and when we're looking at these formulas, they're basically the same. All three of them have lowercase a, b, and c, so all three of them have all three sides in them. The only difference here, each equation, each formula has a different angle. And so this first one has angle A, second one angle B, and third one angle C. And so the way we're going to decide which equation to use is based on which angle we're either given or the angle that we're trying to find. Okay, and so that's how you're going to decide which of these three equations that you're going to be using. So we have a squared equals b squared plus c squared. So notice that whatever you're putting here, you're putting the other two sides here, minus 2bc. So again, whatever two are here, bc, that's what goes here, times cosine of a. And so notice whatever letter, whatever side is out front, that's the angle that's at the end. And so that's one way that can help you memorize this is by saying, okay, if I have a squared up front, I need angle a at the end. If I have b squared up front, I need angle b at the end. Okay, and so we're using these three equations to help us solve missing sides or missing angles. Now, with law of cosines, you kind of have this one big rule that we always go by. And with law of cosines, you can start with law of cosines and then finish with law of sines, because law of sines is a little bit simpler, a little bit easier to use. And so that's one thing we're going to do. We're going to do law of cosines to find one piece, and then use law of sines to find the rest of the pieces. Well, this big rule here says you must use law of cosines to find the biggest angle first. Okay, so we're going to always, when we're doing this, find that biggest angle. So whatever's across from the biggest side, that's going to be our biggest angle. And the reason for this is cosine will give you an obtuse angle, but sine will not. So if you try using law of sine to find an obtuse angle, it'll never work. It'll always give it it's a acute angle that would go with it. And so we can't use law of sines to find an obtuse angle. And so we're always going to find the biggest angles first when we're doing law of cosines. So then our two options here, side, 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 and side, angle, side. When we're doing side, 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 what we're going to do is we're going to find the biggest angle first. And then to find the rest of the things, if you want to switch the law of sines, perfectly fine. Okay, with side, angle, side, we're going to use law of cosines to find the third side. And then you might have to use law of cosines first, again, to find the biggest angle. Okay, so we said you can't use law of sines to find the biggest angle. So we're not going to switch the law of sines if we don't have the biggest angle yet. Now, if it gives you the biggest angle, so if the problem already gives you the biggest angle, then you can go ahead and switch the law of sines. Okay, so the main thing to remember here is make sure you know what the biggest angle is before you switch over to law of sines. All right, let's do an example. So first one, same thing. It's telling us to solve the triangle here. Okay, so I want to make sure and kind of see, what do I already know? So I'm going to go ahead like we've done before and list out my three angles and my three sides, just so we can see what do we already know of this triangle. And so it gives us angle A is 29 degrees, side B is 28, and side C is 17. And so you should see right now, But okay, we don't have a pair. We don't have a match. We don't have A, B, B, or C, C. And so that's what tells me I have to use law of cosines here because there's no match to use law of sines. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use law of cosines. So notice here, the way we choose which of the three formulas to use is by the angle that is given to us. So we're going to be using a squared equals b squared plus c squared minus 2bc, notice bc, times cosine of angle A. Because angle A is the one that's given. So let's go ahead and fill that in. So a squared equals 28 squared plus 17 squared minus 2 times 28 times 17 times cosine of 29 degrees. Now, the best thing about these type of problems is if I look at the right side of my equation here, there is no variable. There's no variable on the right side of this equation. And so the nice thing about these problems is that we can take and we can simply type that entire thing into our calculator and see what it gives us. Okay, so we're going to take 28 squared plus 17 squared minus 2 times 28 times 17 times cosine of 29 degrees. All right, and so that's going to give me a squared equals 240 point, it gives me this long decimal, 33.620,388. Well, we're trying to find side A, and so what I'm going to do to get A by itself is I'm simply going to square root that. Okay, so I'm going to take and I'm going to square root both sides. And so easiest way to do that in your calculator is just square root the answer. So square root answer, and that's going to give me 15.5. All right, so that gives me right here 15.5 for side A. Now what we talked about is now that we have this side, now I know, now I have these matching pieces. Okay, so now I have these, I want to find these angles here. But then what we talked about back here, when we're doing side angle side, if you don't have the biggest angle already, so right here, my biggest angle goes with 28. So angle B right here is going to be my biggest angle. If I don't already have that biggest angle, I have to use law of cosines again to find that angle B. I cannot switch to law of sines yet. If A was my biggest angle, then I could go ahead and switch to law of sines, but I can't right here. So I'm going to use law of cosines again. Again, since I'm trying to find angle B, that's the formula I'm going to use. So I'm going to use B squared equals A squared plus C squared minus 2 AC cosine of B. Okay. So plug in what we know. 28 squared equals 15.5 squared plus 17 squared minus 2, 15.5, 17 cosine of angle B. Now, the problem with this one, we can't just type that whole thing in now, okay, because now we have this variable over here, and so I need to simplify this problem by parts. And so the very first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and just simplify everything. I'm going to take 28 squared. I'm going to take 15.5 squared plus 17 squared and get 529.25. And then I'm going to go ahead and take 2 times 15.5 times 17 and get this minus 527 cosine B. Make sure on these problems you do not subtract these two numbers. Okay, this 527 is attached to this B, and so you cannot subtract those. You cannot do that. And so what our next step is actually going to be, we want to get this B by itself. The first thing I have to do that is subtract this 529.25 on both sides. So that's going to give me 254.75 equals negative 527 cosine B. Next step, divide both sides. So I'm going to get negative 254.75 divided by 527 equals cosine B. Now remember from SOHCAHTOA, how do I get B by itself here? The way we get rid of that cosine is we take the inverse cosine of this entire thing, negative 254.75 over 527. And so we're typing that entire equation into our calculator. So inverse cosine of this fraction, so negative 254.75 divided by 527. And so that should give us angle B is 118.9 degrees. Okay, again, if you would have used 118.9, if you would have used law of sines to try to find angle B, there's no way you could have found it. It would have given you an acute angle. And so now our final step here to find angle C, simply, we know those angles add up to 180, so we can take 180 minus 118.9 minus 29. And so you should get 32.1 degrees. Okay, and this is all of the pieces of my triangle. All right, I want you guys to go ahead and try this one here. This one is a side-side-side triangle. So make sure you find the biggest angle first. So looking at this one, we know 9 is our biggest side, so that means angle Z is our biggest angle. So find angle Z first using law of cosines, and then you can switch to use law of sines to find the other two angles. All right, so here's the answer you should have got. Notice in the red, I found angle Z first, my biggest angle, by using law of cosines. Then in the blue, I switched to the law of sines to find X. And then once I knew angle Z and angle X, then I could simply subtract from 180 to get angle Y. If you found angle Y by using law of sines and then subtracted to get the angle X, it's possible you could be one decimal place off. That is okay. It just depends on if you find X using law of sines or Y using law of sines. All right, go ahead and do practice number 18.